should a maverick candidate, a wild card, so to speak, win Iowa, it may be very well the end of Iowa as being such an important first state.
Really?
Because increasingly Iowa does not look like the rest of the country. The country is much more diverse from a racial and ethnic perspective, and certainly a lot of the bigger states are much more divided between Democrats and Republicans. And of course, more urbanized states, and Iowa's rural. So there are a lot of analysts who believe that if a Ron Paul or a Santorum, for example, win Iowa, that might very well be the end of Iowa as the first state.
They have fought very hard to continue to be first.
They
want to be first.
They absolutely want to be first, and I do believe that some of those delegates, when they go to the caucus meetings tonight, some of the caucus goers tonight will be thinking about which of these candidates is more electable against President Obama, keeping in mind what they know all the other analysts have been talking about is Iowa's presence as the first. And so I think that will enter into the calculation of some of these caucus goers wanting to keep Iowa first, and they may end up going with a more conventional candidate than someone like a Ron Paul.
With that in mind, how much can the results tonight in Iowa sort of dictate or influence the future in New Hampshire and South Carolina and even down to Florida?
Certainly the results will have an impact, but it's very likely that New Hampshire is going to go for Romney. All the polls show that he's leading handily there. So whoever wins tonight, if it's not Romney, and Romney wins in New Hampshire, that brings it to South Carolina. And then, of course, the punchline will be Florida, because Florida is the biggest swing state and the most diverse, and the most likely to be representative of Republican votes across the country in key states with large numbers of electoral college votes.
Susan, do you mind talking about Florida again? The wind was blowing, and I'm
Right,
afraid it
okay.
was going to rip across your
right.
microphone.
Okay.
So let's talk about how ultimately Florida, as you said, was going to be the big state.
Right. Ultimately, Florida will be the biggest state on the whole. Well, let me say it again.
Sure.
Florida is going to be the state everybody watches, because candidates that can't do well in Florida are certainly not going to do well at getting the nomination, and more importantly at winning the election against President Obama. The Electoral College is, you know, the larger states in the Electoral College have more punch, and Florida got 2 more votes in the Electoral College because of the census. So we're the biggest swing state in the country that's up for grabs. So you can bet that Republicans in the rest of the states that come after us will be carefully watching how the candidates shake out in Florida.
What's the biggest unknown tonight that you're interested in seeing what happens?
It is totally impossible to predict turnout from polls. And that's always a lesson that people have to learn. They're going into the election thinking that Romney and Paul and Santorum are all clustered, and maybe they are, but the rank ordering of them is very unknown, because it all depends on whose caucus goers have the most fervor that they're going to go out on a very cold night and spend a lot of time arguing about the candidates. And so it takes really committed caucus goers, and that's something that polls cannot predict.
It gets a little frustrating for me sometimes to see pundits suggest that this is over, or it's already been decided, when not a single vote has been cast yet.
Right, not a single vote has been cast, and frankly, the votes that will be cast tonight aren't the official votes. They'll still have to have party conventions later on, and it will amount to less than 1% of the total number of delegates needed to nominate. That's why a lot of people are thinking that it's disproportionately a thing, that a lot of people think that the caucuses in Iowa get disproportionate attention relative to the big picture. And that's where Florida comes in, because Florida is the big picture.
Right. You live in this world, so you know all of these candidates, I'm sure.
Right.
I, for the most part, live in this world as well and know all the candidates. Do you think the voters at this point, despite all of these debates that have been out there, and we've been talking about it for a year now, do you think they know who these 7 candidates really are?
I think they know who they really are. The question is, do they go with their gut feeling as to electability? Is that the most important, who can beat President Obama? Or do they go with their ideological disposition, which may yield a very different candidate? So So I think that's the tug of war that Iowa caucus goers are undergoing right now. Do they go for the person they think that can beat President Obama, or do they go with the ideological candidate most in sync with themselves?
Does the implication of, or what you're implying there, mean that they're not necessarily one and the same?
They're not necessarily one and the same. And the last poll that was done, I believe yesterday, shows that about 40% of the caucus goers say they still don't know who they're going to support. That's why these meetings where you hear what other people have to say and you look at your neighbors and see who they're going for, that's why they can have so much of an impact. But frankly, if you've lived in Iowa and you've wanted to see any of these candidates, you would have had no problem seeing them in person, and many of them multiple times.
Because it's not a fairly big state, and I mean, they can go door to door.
No. That's why they call Iowa the retail politics state, is because you can basically, the candidates can act as a salesperson directly to the voter. They're trying to sell themselves to the voter. But the question is now whether the retail politics is really that essential, and debates have called the whole idea of retail politics into question, because it now seems that the debates have had a lot of sway. They've brought down candidates and they've brought some up. And the personal meeting with people doesn't seem to be as impactful, at least that's what we see so far, as it has been in the past.
Do you find it interesting that the debates have had that kind of sway, given the fact that there's 7 to 8 candidates participating, so not every candidate is getting a lot of time to say anything?
People love the debates, and I hearken back to the 2008 election, where the first debate you had 10 Republicans on the stage and 8 Democrats on their stage. It's kind of like a reality show. It's almost week by week, somebody's up, somebody's down, and who the winner is the excitement that we'll see this evening. But I think choice has made people very interested. The whole direction of the country, the numbers are very bad, and people are looking for something different, particularly Republicans, and it's just created a lot of interest. And I think seeing candidates side by side, how they react with each other, is sometimes more impactful on a potential voter than a news account of it or somebody else's interpretation. They like to make up their minds for themselves.
You still think it's the best way to differentiate the candidates?
I think it is definitely a good way that gets public engaged. People who are likely voters are very interested in debates. And besides that, all the cable channels that have run them have made a lot of money. So it seems to be a win-win for the media and for the voters.
There you go.